Trade talks terminated. President Trump has announced that he is ending negotiations with Canada, all over an advertisement put out by Ontario's government. The ad uses the words from President Ronald Reagan in a 1987 address, there's video right there, where he criticizes tariffs.
In early 2025, the world watched as two political heavyweights went head-to-head in one of the most dramatic trade wars in North American history. On one side stood Donald Trump, armed with sweeping tariff threats designed to squeeze American advantages out of every deal. On the other stood Doug Ford, Ontario's premier, who quickly branded himself Captain Canada and vowed to fight back with everything he had. What followed was a months-long battle of bluffs, boycotts, and billion-dollar consequences that would reshape Canada-US relations for years to come. This is the full story of what actually happened. The conflict started brewing in January 2025, when Trump announced plans for 25% tariffs on Canadian goods. His strategy was straightforward: protect American industries and use economic pressure to force concessions from America's northern neighbor. The stakes were enormous. We're talking about steel, aluminum, automobiles, energy exports, whiskey, and critical minerals. Billions of dollars in trade hung in the balance. Along with hundreds of thousands of jobs on both sides of the border, Doug Ford saw an opportunity in the chaos. Days before those tariffs were set to take effect, Ford did something unexpected. He dissolved Ontario's majority government and called a snap election, one that wasn't even due until mid-2026. His pitch to voters was simple: give me a mandate to fight Trump. Ford positioned the entire vote as an anti-Trump referendum. He promised to, and these are his words, rain economic punishment on the United States. He painted himself as the lone defender of Canadian interests against what he called American bullying. It was a bold political gamble, but Ford was betting that fear of Trump would drive voters to his side. The gamble paid off. In February 2025, Ford secured a landslide victory, winning a third consecutive majority government with 41% of the vote. Voter turnout was low at just 45%, but Ford didn't care. He now had his mandate, and he was ready to use it. During his victory speech, he declared that Donald Trump thinks he can break us, but he was about to prove Trump wrong. With his election win secured, Ford immediately escalated the fight. When Trump officially imposed 25% tariffs on Canadian goods in March, Ford hit back hard. He ordered a complete boycott of American alcohol across Ontario, pulling whiskey, vodka, and other U.S. spirits from store shelves. This move alone threatened to cost American producers billions in lost sales. But Ford wasn't done. He announced a 25% surcharge on electricity exports to Michigan, New York, and Minnesota. Ontario supplies power to roughly 1.5 million American customers, and Ford made it clear he was willing to weaponize that dependency. At a major mining conference in Toronto, he told the crowd he would cut off their energy with a smile on his face. The message was clear: Canada wasn't going to roll over. Trump's response was swift and brutal. He doubled tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum, raising them to a crushing 50%. The economic pressure was mounting on both sides, but Canada was feeling it more. Hundreds of thousands of Canadian jobs were suddenly at risk, and businesses were scrambling to figure out their next moves. Then something interesting happened. After all the tough talk and threats, Ford folded. Following a phone call with the Trump administration, Ford headed to Washington, D.C., alongside Federal Minister Dominic LeBlanc. The man who promised to never back down was now seeking negotiations. Critics immediately pounced, calling it a humiliating retreat. But the rhetoric never stopped. Throughout April, May, and June of 2025, Ford continued calling Trump a tyrant and blamed him for the economic chaos affecting ordinary Canadians. He urged Prime Minister Mark Carney to hit back twice as hard whenever Trump made new threats. Ford floated ideas about additional energy taxes and warned that no quick deal was coming anytime soon. September brought one of the strangest moments of the entire showdown. After Crown Royal's parent company announced they were shifting some bottling operations to the United States because of the tariff situation, Ford held a press conference that nobody would forget. He dramatically poured out a bottle of Crown Royal whiskey in front of the cameras, urging all Ontarians to dump American products and support Canadian companies instead. Supporters loved it. Critics called it petty and performative. Either way, It became one of the defining images of the entire conflict. October brought even more drama. Trump had been taunting Canada with threats about becoming the 51st state, and Ford finally addressed it publicly. He said Trump drives me crazy, but vowed to simply ignore the provocations. However, Ford had another card to play. He launched a $75 million advertising campaign that would air across the United States, including during the World Series. The ads used edited audio of Ronald Reagan to attack Trump's tariff policies. It was a bold move designed to turn American public opinion against their own president's trade war. It backfired spectacularly. The Reagan Foundation immediately called the ads fraudulent and demanded they be pulled. Trump was furious. He terminated all ongoing trade negotiations between Canada and the United States, specifically citing Ford's egregious advertising stunt as the reason. Ford eventually pulled the ads, but the damage was done. What was supposed to be a clever public relations move had instead given Trump the perfect excuse to walk away from the negotiating table entirely. As a last resort, Ford threatened to withhold Ontario's critical minerals, essential for electric vehicle batteries and high-tech manufacturing. But by this point, Ford's credibility was damaged. His bluffs had been called too many times. By December 2025, the dust was settling, and it wasn't a pretty picture for Canada. Ford faced corruption accusations back home, including questions about a $2.5 billion fund critics called a slush fund. Many of his promises had gone unfulfilled. He had pledged to secure a deal by July. That never happened. He promised to hire 1,000 additional RCMP officers for border security. That never happened either. The Ontario legislature sat for fewer than 55 days that entire year. Looking at the broader impact, the economic consequences were severe. Tariffs drove up costs for American consumers on imported goods. But Canadian workers faced the real threat of massive job losses. Estimates suggested up to 500,000 Canadian jobs were at risk. Major companies shifted production to avoid tariffs. Ontario's deficit ballooned to its largest level outside of the COVID pandemic. Politically, Ford's tactics boosted his popularity at home initially, but he alienated federal leaders and other provincial premiers who resented his overreach into trade policy, which is technically a federal responsibility in Canada. He was accused of gaslighting Canadians about what he could actually deliver. Trump, meanwhile, used the entire situation to project strength. By terminating negotiations and forcing concessions, he could claim victory regardless of the actual economic outcomes. Public reaction was deeply mixed. Ford's supporters hailed him as a street fighter who stood up to American bullying. His critics called him an international embarrassment whose petty stunts humiliated Canada on the world stage. Social media was filled with clips of Ford backing down after his various bluffs were called. The long-term consequences may be the most significant. The showdown set the stage for extremely difficult trade negotiations heading into 2026. The existing trade agreement between Canada, the United States, and Mexico was due for renegotiation, and Canada's position had been weakened considerably. Some analysts argued that Ford's actions, rather than helping Canada, had actually given the Americans more leverage than they would have otherwise had in the end. This showdown was more about bluster than substance. Neither side achieved a clear policy victory, but it exposed just how vulnerable the Canada-US trade relationship really is, and how quickly economic disputes can spiral into full-blown political theater when strong personalities are involved. The question now is whether the damage can be repaired, or whether 2025 was just the opening act of a much longer and more painful conflict between these two nations.